Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Barry Beckham. If you're watching on YouTube, can I invite you to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you're advised whenever I put up a new video. Well, what we're going to do here is to use the standard version of PTE AV Studio to demonstrate one or two sound editing techniques. As you can see here, I'm just using a few images for our demo, so I don't have to keep scrolling from one end of the timeline to the other. There's two ways we can get a sound file into our slideshow. One of those is to go to the Project Options button at the extreme bottom left of the screen. When that opens up, we need to go to the Audio tab, and we'll notice here that we've got no tracks and we haven't got any audio files. If I just click to add an audio file, I will need to navigate to where I'm working. There's the piece of music that I'd like to use. It's called Gliding. When I select Open, you'll notice that track 1 is automatically created for us, and within track 1 we've got our piece of music. Now let me cancel that. There is another way we can do this. If we go down to the extreme bottom right of the screen and hit the timeline, we can do this with simple click and drag. Now there's a couple of nice shortcuts here that are probably worth trying to remember. Control P will always bring up your project options, and the F6 key will always toggle between the timeline and the slide list, so we can switch back and forth fairly quickly. This piece of music is an MP3 file, and the author of the music is Eric Mathias. Eric's music is freely available to us, and you'll find a link to his website below. Once we have the music file in the timeline, we need to decide exactly when we want it to start. We can do that fairly easily by just clicking and dragging. So if I wanted my music to start with the title slide, I could move it to the extreme left. You can see I may need to make an adjustment here. I can always place my cursor over the end of this file. A couple of little arrows appear, although one of them's lost off the screen, and I can click and drag it back slightly. So if I needed to move it slightly more to the left, you can see we've got options there. On this occasion, let's begin the music at the first slide in the sequence, and we can line up the WAV file with the start of this image appearing on screen. Now once we've spent some time synchronizing all of these images to the music, we're often in this situation where the music is far longer than we require it, and in fact I am going to have to scroll a little bit to the right so you can see the end of the music file. So there you can see the end of the slideshow, and we've got some editing to do at the end. Now we can shorten the music, but here's a question. Do we trim from the end of the music and fade it out so it sounds right? Or do we trim from the start of the music and fade in? That's a creative choice you're going to have to make. We'll take a look at both options, starting with trimming at the end. Now we've already done this really at the front end of this sound file. So if I move my cursor to the end here, you can see that double-headed arrow. Click and drag, and I can drag back that right the way to the point when I want the music to stop. Now it wouldn't be a good idea for me to leave that sound file at that position. See that peak? I would rather have that just prior to that peak. It'll probably sound, if I can say it, a little bit sweeter if we just keep that peak out of the final sound file. What we've effectively done by dragging back the end of this WAV file is to trim the music. So it would end rather abruptly here, so we're going to need to fade it out. How many seconds do we choose? Again, that's going to be a personal choice. I tend to go for something like 10 or 15 seconds. We'll try 15 seconds here. To do that, we need to go back into our project options and the audio tab. Remember that shortcut, Control P. There's the piece of music that we've selected. In most cases, we're going to see perhaps more tracks down here, or more music, or sound effects, or commentary. In our case, for our demo, we've just got the one sound file. Over on the right, we can choose to fade out this piece of music. We can use the arrows to do that, but I tend to click and drag, highlight the value, and just overtype it with my 15 seconds, and OK. We don't see any visual evidence at the end of the WAV file that it is in fact faded out. We're going to have to play it and listen. So let's do that next by putting the cursor just before the last image, and I'll allow this to play in the mini player here. Well, that sounded pretty good. Now if you cut back the music as I've just demonstrated here, and you fade the music out, but when you watch and listen to what you have, you feel you've got a second or two too much or too little, you can place the cursor over the end and you can drag the WAV file one way or the other to correct it. And then you'd have to listen again, of course, to make sure you got it right. You wouldn't have to readjust the 15-second fade out. That would be applied automatically to the end of your sound file. Now if we were putting together a slideshow such as this, it's not unusual to sometimes want to make a change maybe at the front. We may want to include a blank after the title. In that case, we're going to want more space and we need to move all of our slides to the right. And if we do that, we're going to compromise the synchronization with the music. Well, why don't we link slide 1 with the music? To do that, if we select slide 1, move down to the sound file and right click, you can see I can link audio clip to slide 2. Well, it's slide 2 here, of course, because it's counting the blank as one. And in fact, I could have anchored this to any one of these slides. But now if I wanted to reduce the gap between the start and here, when I move that, I can move not only all of the images but the sound file too, so we don't lose that synchronization. Now sometimes we can have a piece of music where maybe the last few bars at the end are important to the sequence we're making. We may decide to cut back the front and fade the music in at the start. Well, let's do that next. I'm going to remove that by dragging it back up to the top, and I'll drag down another version of gliding, and this one of course now is unedited. So what we want to do is to line up the end of that music file with the two blanks we've got at the end. Now I can't click and drag it any more to the left, because if we scroll back to the left we can see it's hard against the left hand side. So if I put my cursor over the edge, I can drag it in. I can drag it in further than I need, just to make sure I can drag this back to this sort of point. And of course, before we actually decide what to do at the front, we would need to have a little test here, I think. So let's go back to the mini player and press play, watch and listen for a few seconds. You can see what I mean. The end of the music works particularly well. Now we just need to do the same as we did at the end of the WAV file a few moments ago. We can drag this back to the start. We can make a decision on where we want it to start. Let's go right to the start at the extreme left hand side. We can see we've got a 10-second marker there, so if I give 15 seconds to fade in, it's going to be fading up to full volume about there, and I think that's going to work. So once again, project options, Control P, There's our sound file. This time we want to fade in. I'll overtype my value with 15 seconds, click OK, and once again we'd need to put our cursor right back at the start, watch and listen. And I think that worked pretty well. Don't forget though, if you then find that 15 seconds is too much, drop back into the Project Options Music tab and you can drop it down to 10 seconds, or in fact, in some circumstances you may need even a longer fade in. But 10 to 15 seconds seems to work best most of the time. So what do we do if the music is too short for the number of images we want to use in our slideshow? To demonstrate this, I've added the images I've got in the slide list here. I've added them a couple more times. So if I scroll to the right, you can now see that the slideshow we was working with a few moments ago is significantly longer. So let me scroll back to the start, pick up my music and drag it down. And I'm going to place it more or less where we did before, in about that position. So it's lined up nicely with the start. When I scroll to the end, we can see we've got quite a gap to fill. So how would we do that? Well, we could add a second piece of music, or even the same piece of music, and allow it to play twice. Just for the moment though, I'd like to take you back into the project options. The button is at the bottom left, but remember that shortcut, Control P. When we drag the music file down into the timeline, PTE AV Studio automatically created track 1 for us. What I could do is click to add an audio file, and I could add another piece of music into the same track. If I do that, they're going to play one after the other. So I could choose a different piece of music, or I could choose the same piece of music and allow it to play twice. But there's also another way to do this. Let me cancel that for a moment. And what we'll do here is we'll drag gliding down again and we'll place it in that position. Now when we look into our project options, you can see the two pieces of music, albeit both being the same in our case, but they're both in track 1. But I could drag the music down into a second track. Let's have a look at that again with Control P to open up the project options. Now these two pieces of music will play simultaneously, but we would have to deal with the one ending and one starting and the crossover of the two tracks. But we have a way to deal with that too. Let's cancel this for a moment, and I'm going to drag that back into track 1. Let's move across here, or let's move to the end first. I want to use the end of this track for the end of my slideshow. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to drag it down again. I think it might be easier to do this, easier to demonstrate it, not to do it, but demonstrate it. You can see I've got quite a bit of overlap there. So what I could do is pick up the end or the start of that track or that piece of music in track 2, drag it back and allow it to just overlap at the end. See how those two are lining up? I may even just try to get that a little sweeter, right? Something like that. Now I'm going to drag this up into track 1. And what you can see there is an automatic crossfade. The software is automatically going to blend those two tracks together. Now in most cases it does a very, very good job of this. But of course if it doesn't, when we watch and listen, we can adjust the ends, we can make the crossfade longer or shorter. It all depends how it sounds. So that's what we've got to do next. Let's place the cursor at that point and we'll press play and we'll listen and see exactly what we have. Now, I did say that the crossfade works most of the time, and I hope you'll agree it worked pretty well there without any further editing at all. Well, now we have the benefit, of course, of using the start of the sound file with the first image, but we've also been able to use the end with the end of our slideshow. And I suppose when you think about it, we could even use this system when we're trying to shorten the music, but we'd rather like to use the start and the end of the track we've chosen. So let's assume we've got a slideshow which is about 3 minutes in length. We've got a 5-minute track of music. What we could do is apply it twice, use the front end and the back end, trim it back and allow the crossfade to take care of the change from one track to another in the middle. Even if we use different music, you'll find the crossfade works remarkably well. If we intend to use commentary or sound effects with our music, in most situations the volume of the music will need to be strategically reduced to enable the spoken word to be heard. It's generally much the same with sound effects, but perhaps not quite so crucial as it is with commentary. Now, many enthusiasts turn to software like Audacity, which is a free sound editor. That works fine, but it's not quite as easy or anywhere near as convenient as the envelope tool would be in the professional version of PTE AV Studio. If you look above into the file list, you'll notice the piece of music we've been using for this demo, but I've also got a little bit of commentary here. I'm going to click and drag the commentary down, but I'm going to make a second track. So what we would need to do here, from about this sort of position, we would need to have the music fading down, so the spoken word could be heard as it's being read, and then from about this position, then the volume of the music would need to rise back up to its normal level. Now I'm going to use a little bit of video magic here. I'm going to spin the screen around in a second or two, and we're going to take a look at how this is done in the professional version of PTE AV Studio. I think visually it gives you a good idea of exactly what we need to do. Then we'll take a little look at Audacity. Now there's an obvious difference in both the music file and also the commentary. The orange line represents 100% of the volume. If I click on it, it will leave a little anchor point, and you can see that it's set at 100%. So somewhere around here I would need my anchor point. I would need another anchor point here. It's just a single click that will do that. I'm probably going to need another one here as we start to raise up back to full volume. And what I would do is simply drag that down so the spoken word can be clearly heard. Now let's give it a try. I'm going to put my cursor just back to that point. The Blue Mountains, a rugged, majestic area west of Sydney, Australia, and they take us back to the dawn of time. Well, how did that sound? Now you could see how quick and easy it was to apply this, and once we listen to it we can quite easily make changes to it as well. We can click any of the audio key points and I could make my fade out a little more abrupt. I could make my fade up a little more abrupt. I can adjust the volume very quickly, and if I needed to tweak the commentary up just a little bit, then I could click and maybe just raise that a bit too. And we can quickly put the cursor in position, listen and watch and make sure we've got it just about right. So if you was looking for a good reason to upgrade to the professional version, I think this is it all by itself, but there are other benefits too. Let's take a look at Audacity. I'll add a link to the Audacity website where you can download this free sound editor. Here we are in the main screen of Audacity. What I need to do is to open up the piece of music we've been using and also that piece of commentary. I can do that by going to the top left, File, Import, Audio. I'll select both of these together and click Open. Doesn't matter which way round these come up, but if you're fussy about how they sit on screen, if you go to this little arrow here, you can move that track up, so we could use the commentary below and the music above. With the double-headed arrow selected from the toolbox at the top left, I can slide my commentary along to the desired position. Now all I've got to do is reduce the volume of the music above. I can do that using the envelope tool, and what we can do here is anchor some audio points much the same as we did in PTE AV Studio. So let's click one there, and you can see I'm placing them just on the edge of the audio file, and then I can drag this down and this one down, and then we'd have to do exactly what we've done before. We'd have to just play it and listen, but as before we can move these along, so if we want it to fade out a bit more abruptly, or we can click and drag these along, we can make infinite adjustments. But what we need to do next is just to play it and see how it sounds. For that we're going to need the cursor from the top left. Let's select that, and I'll place my cursor around that position. The Blue Mountains, a rugged, majestic area west of Sydney, Australia, and they take us back to the dawn of time. How did that sound? I think I've got this a little wrong. If I go back to my envelope tool, I think this area here needs to come in a little bit and maybe down a little more, but we're all going to choose something different, and I think you've got a pretty good idea of how it works. What we have to do once we've done the mix to our satisfaction is to save this as a project. In other words, save it in a way you would with PTE AV Studio, where you can come back and make changes to these two tracks should you need to later, and there's a good chance you might. But finally you would go to File, Export as an MP3, and you can export the entire track mixed down together, ready for putting into PTE AV Studio. I've now brought you back into PTE AV Studio Standard Edition. There's one or two other things that may be useful. One of the things we can do once we've made our edits to any sound file, we can select the sound file, right click, and we can lock the track. If we do that, we'll see a little padlock appear up at the far right, and now we're prevented from making any other changes. To remove it, we simply right click and we unlock the track. We can also mute the sound as well. That's sometimes useful if you've put a slideshow together and you don't want to move or remove the soundtrack, but you just want to try another piece of music, see how it looks. Well, there's another option. Select the soundtrack you want to mute, right click, and where is it? Right at the top, and a nice little shortcut key there of Control M. When we do that, you can see the little symbol up at the far right, which tells us that in fact the volume is muted. And once again, to remove that, right click the track again, and we can remove the tick. Now, as you can see by the change of the screen, to bring this video to a close, I've just opened up the Project Options Audio tab one more time. We've got some options here we've not looked at, but we've actually used all of them, but we've accessed them in the timeline. Because we can link to a slide here, but that seems to me to be a lot more convenient within the timeline down here. The offset here, we're showing that we're starting the music 4.7 seconds into the sequence. Well, we can see that by the gap we've got here. And if I move that to the left, then this figure would reduce. The start time is effectively anything we've cut off the front, and we've done none of that here. But it is showing that we've taken 1 minute and 28 seconds off the end, which is what we did when we dragged the end of the WAV file to the end of the sequence. So they're just repeating what we've already done. Fade in and fade out we've looked at, and of course the volume, we can adjust the volume of the entire WAV file, and some music, as I'm sure you've noticed, can be extremely loud or louder than normal. Well, that can come in handy there. I've been involved in audiovisual for well over 40 years, and one of the things I've learned is I'm almost never satisfied. Whenever we create a sequence, and this is particularly true with sound as well as with the visuals too, is we're almost certain to want to go back in and make tiny changes. What we tend to do is make a change on day one, which we think is great. By the time we've heard and seen what we've done on day 2, 3 and 4, we realize it wasn't quite so good. So it's vitally important when you're doing your sound editing, no matter how you work, to keep saving a project file. Make sure you've always got the ability to go back, and sometimes even to previous versions, to make changes. Thanks for watching.